My name is Derrick Broze. For the last decade, I've worked as an investigative journalist, hosting a radio show, writing books, and producing numerous documentaries about the realities of child trafficking, the dangers of technology, and indigenous struggles. Now, I aim to uncover whether there exists a network which ties these issues together. Many researchers posit the existence of an international cartel which covertly manipulates world events for their own benefit. Are these claims simply fantasy and paranoid delusion, or is there truly an agenda to subvert humanity to the demands of the pyramid of power?
Chapter 15: The Pedo-Class. Warning: this episode contains vivid discussions of child abuse. Viewer discretion is advised. The longer one spends time tumbling down the rabbit hole, researching the various pieces of the pyramid of power, the more likely you are to learn about examples of child abuse. From teachers and sports coaches to law enforcement and celebrities and politicians, it certainly appears as if there is a society-wide problem with pedophilic behavior and the abuse of young children. Unfortunately, examples of this behavior can be found in all political parties, religions, ethnicities, professions, and lifestyles. A quick search on the news on any given day will reveal stories of arrests made on the local, regional, national, and international levels. Even organizations like the Boy Scouts of America have not been immune to claims of sexual abuse of children. Demographic data on pedophiles shows they are generally above average intelligence and live what appear to be normal and respectable lives. The Guardian reported in 2007 that restricted Scotland Yard documents show that the UK's child abusers are usually white males aged between 36 to 45. The majority are in long-term relationships, married, or have children. Almost all have no previous convictions of sexual abuse. Let's dive deeper into the definition of pedophilia. What is pedophilia? Pedophilia is defined as a sexual perversion or psychiatric disorder in which an adult or older adolescent experiences a primary or exclusive sexual attraction to prepubescent children. The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or DSM, says a pedophilic disorder is defined as a pattern of pedophilic arousal accompanied by either subjective distress or interpersonal difficulty, or having acted on that arousal. Despite the public often labeling any instance of child abuse as pedophilia, the psychiatric diagnostic criteria for pedophilia considers the cutoff point for prepubescence to be 13 years old. In fact, several subtypes of pedophilia exist based on the specific age group which arouses the individual. For example, infantophilia or nepiophilia refers to a sexual preference for children under the age of 5, especially infants and toddlers, while hebephilia is defined as individuals with a primary or exclusive sexual interest in children aged 11 to 14 years old. Finally, ephebophiles have a primary sexual interest in mid to late adolescents, generally ages 15 to 19 years old. This would mean, for example, that the infamous sex offender Jeffrey Epstein was not a pedophile, but would more accurately be termed a hebephile because the majority of the young girls he abused were young teenagers. Previous chapters of this series have covered Jeffrey Epstein's alleged connections to Israeli and British intelligence services, as well as his numerous relationships with celebrities, scientists, politicians, journalists, and other high-profile socialites. Either way, regardless of these distinctions, we continue to see consistent reports detailing the abuse of young children and teenagers across all sectors of society. We are going to focus on two lesser-known incidents of child abuse allegations which intersect with government, intelligence agencies, and religious institutions. What can we learn by understanding these dark chapters in history? Is there a common thread to these horrific situations? We should also consider the possibility that there is an effort to conceal the prevalence of pedophilia and child abuse. The Finders Cult. Accusations of pedophilia with links to the CIA. In 2018, I began researching the group known as the Finders Cult, an eccentric group of parents who claimed to be traveling journalists who were accused of being involved in everything from child trafficking, pedophilia, Satanism, and connections to the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency. In pursuit of this topic, I would spend months combing through obscure forums, police documents, tracking down former members of the Finders, and former police officers who had worked on the case in the late 1980s. I ended up releasing a documentary titled Who Will Find What the Finders Hide, telling the story of the mysterious group and the incident which made them infamous around the world. The story goes like this. The Finders Cult was a young group of men, women, and children who claimed to be nothing more than former hippies living an alternative lifestyle and practicing alternative parenting. The Finders were founded by a mysterious man named Marion Petty, who had military intelligence connections and was nicknamed the Game Caller. He believed in turning his life and the lives of those around him into a constant game or experiment. The Finders members followed Petty's every order without question. The trouble for the group began in Florida on Wednesday, February 4th, 1987, when an anonymous caller told the Tallahassee Police Department that two well-dressed men were at a local park with 6 kids and a blue van. The children were described as looking disheveled with potential signs of abuse. Tallahassee police arrived and questioned the two men, Douglas E. Ammerman and Michael Houlihan, members of the Finders who said they were taking the kids to a school for brilliant children in Mexico. The men also said the children were being weaned from their mothers. Authorities eventually took the men and the children into custody. A search of the van turned up 20 floppy computer disks, a TSR-80 computer, and a device that police said could be used to hook into a computer in another location by telephone. Immediately it became clear that this case was not like any other. Following the arrests, the Associated Press reported that police had moved the children from a shelter after receiving a half-dozen calls threatening the kids. The Associated Press reported, quote, children were moved to an undisclosed location where they were being protected by armed guards. When interviewed by the police, the kids claimed the men were their teachers and that they had been living in a house with other children and adults. The children were unaware of modern technology, including phones, televisions, hot water, staplers, typewriters, and electricity. The oldest child said they received instructions from a man they called a game caller or a game leader. The Washington Post reported that a confidential police source previously told the authorities the Finders were a cult that conducted brainwashing techniques at a warehouse and apartment in Washington, D.C. The source told of being recruited by the Finders with promises of financial reward and sexual gratification, and of being invited by one member to explore Satanism. At that point, officials with the U.S. Customs Service Agency joined the investigation due to suspicion that the potential crimes may have crossed state or national borders. The U.S. Attorney's Office and the Federal Bureau of Investigations were also said to have been investigating the case. After learning the children were based in the D.C. area, the Tallahassee Department contacted D.C. Metropolitan Police to establish the identities of the children. Tallahassee Police spokesman Scott Hunt told reporters that D.C. police were already aware of the Finders. On Friday, February 6th, Virginia State Police raided a 90-acre farm owned by Marion Petty in rural Madison County, Virginia. Neighbors of the farm said children were often brought to the farm in vans, usually crying. An FBI report states that the evidence of a satanic cult ritual was discovered. The same report notes that all reports regarding Finders are to be classified as secret. Meanwhile, D.C. Metro Police and U.S. Customs Service agents raided other Finders properties, including a duplex apartment building and warehouse in Washington, D.C. Police reports and articles from 1987 indicate that the D.C. police removed large plastic bags filled with color slides, photographs, and photographic contact sheets from the warehouse. Some of the photos were of naked children. U.S. Customs spokesman David Hoover told the Post, quote, "We're not saying that it's pornographic, but it has all the earmarks." A U.S. Customs Service report filed by Customs Agent Ramon Martinez described some of the photos as showing blood rituals involving children slaughtering goats while adults in white robes watched. Martinez's report also mentioned that police had found instructions on how to purchase children. By Monday, February 9th, 5 days after the children and their 2 male chaperones were arrested, the Metropolitan Police announced that they had found no evidence of wrongdoing or satanic activity by the Finders. Health officials in Florida then said they had no evidence of sexual abuse of the children. D.C. Metro Police Chief Maurice Turner Jr. stated that the department had not uncovered any evidence to, quote, collaborate allegations made by an informant that the organization is a cult and that its activities involve satanic rituals. By Thursday, February 12th, the FBI's Washington field office also said the investigation had not uncovered any evidence of federal violations. However, according to the New York Times reporting at the time, quote, the statement from the Metropolitan Police Department conflicts with accounts from the police in Tallahassee, Florida, where the children were found unwashed and hungry, and that officials there say that at least 2 of the children had signs of sexual abuse. Tallahassee Police Reports. This report from the New York Times was confirmed in 2018 when 75 pages of Tallahassee police reports were finally released to the public. The documents make it clear that when the eldest child was questioned about sexual abuse, she became very evasive. She said there was no bad touches between the children and adults, and reportedly became fidgety and wanted the interview to end. The same police report mentions that an official with the Department of Health and Rehabilitative Services said 2 children were confirmed cases of sexual abuse. Jane Patia, with the Department of Health and Rehabilitative Services, stated that a Dr. Moorer had found one of the children lacked, quote, anal sphincter control, consistent with acts of sodomy. Also, one of the girls had signs consistent with vaginal penetration by the fingers. Despite these reports, by February 24th, lead investigator Rick Huffman officially ended the Tallahassee Police Department's investigation into the finders. Huffman did not mention the reports of sexual abuse by the doctors with HRS. The release of the Tallahassee Police Department documents add more evidence to the theory that agencies within the federal government covered up the crimes of the finders. This alleged cover-up even made headlines in 1993 when U.S. News and World Report reported that the Department of Justice was initiating a new investigation into allegations that the CIA was somehow connected to the finders cult and had worked to cover up the case. U.S. Customs Agent Ramon Martinez, as well as local police officers in Tallahassee, had spent the previous years attempting to alert the authorities to the apparent cover-up. After interviewing dozens of people directly involved in the case and reviewing hundreds of documents, the DOJ concluded there was no evidence of child abuse or trafficking, satanic cult activity, or law enforcement complicity. In the minds of the authorities, the case was closed. However, as we have uncovered here, there are many details that ought not be forgotten. While it may be easy to dismiss these claims as nothing more than conspiracy, it's difficult to ignore the statements from the Tallahassee Department of Health and Rehabilitative Services regarding signs of sexual abuse. We also have the original reports from Customs Agent Ramon Martinez describing detailed information relating to trafficking of children. While participating in the raid of the finder's warehouse, Martinez conducted a limited search of the documents and claimed he saw many suspicious details, including detailed instructions for obtaining children for unspecified purposes and another message specifically ordering the purchase of 2 children in Hong Kong to be arranged through a contact in the Chinese embassy. In October 2018, I spoke with Ramon Martinez via email about his experience, his claims of a cover-up, and whether or not he still stood by his story. In one email, Martinez made it clear that he stands by his original report and does not believe anyone will be held responsible. On November 1st, 2018, Martinez wrote, quote, nothing's ever come of any info I've provided over the years except professional grief. I have no delusions of anyone ever being held accountable for what I know happened. I decided I would fly across the United States to attempt to meet Martinez in person to encourage him to go public with his knowledge of a government cover-up of the abuse of children. Martinez kindly told me to F off and stay away from him. He has since refused to answer my emails or my phone calls. In September 2018, I became the first person in more than 30 years to interview a member of the Finders on the record. I spoke with the Finders spokesperson Robert Terrell, a man who was the self-described right-hand man for Marion Petty. Terrell told the story of how he became involved with the Finders after he helped a friend get a job.
When he got to town, this friend of mine suggested that he talk to me and see if I could help him get a job, which I did. I sent him over to this real estate developer, and the real estate developer turned him over to the superintendent, who happened to be M.D. Petty's son, George Petty. George hired him, And Michael came back to my office to thank me and invited me to come over to visit this group of people who were all working for George and living in a community in D.C. that had come to be known as the New Ark. He told me that the door was never locked and I was welcome to come by any time and meet the folks, so that sounded interesting.
In early 1972, Terrell would begin visiting the finder's house, the New Ark, and eventually meet Marion Petty. Terrell said he was fascinated and impressed by Petty.
And I went back to visit him again and realized that he was a spiritual teacher. Based on the questions that he asked me. And so I asked him some questions as well.
After meeting Petty, Terrell decided to move into the New Ark with the finders and traveled with them around the country. Soon after, Terrell's wife filed for divorce. After giving the majority of his savings to his ex-wife and children, Terrell then used his remaining savings to purchase several buildings for the finders. It is these buildings which would later be raided by the police. I asked Terrell directly about the 1987 arrests and the claims of child abuse involving the finders.
I want to give you an opportunity just to answer as clearly as possible, and if you can restate the question, just to make it clear for the audience.
Yeah, sure.
Is there any truth to the finders, the New Ark, having involvement with trafficking children, with child molestation, with child pedophilia, any of these sort of things that have come up in the last 2 or 3 decades?
Absolutely. There was no child molestation. There was no trafficking children. That was a complete fantasy fiction.
Terrell claims that the rumors of Satanism and child abuse came from a disgruntled former member of the finders who reported these allegedly false claims to the police in an effort to get back at an ex-boyfriend.
There was a man named Alan Schoen who was a part of the finders, and he met a woman outside, and they became close friends, and after a while, I don't know what was going on between the two of them, but he pulled away from her. He had told her something about our effort to raise free children, and she went to the DC police and told them that we were a satanic cult. And so they opened an investigation. I don't know what a satanic cult is, or even whether it's against the law, but...
Was this in D.C.? Was this investigation? She went to the D.C. police, or?
Yes, it was in D.C. And as evidence of the fact that we were a satanic cult, she took a police officer into the park. Our apartment buildings were right next to Glover Archibald Park, which is a 400-acre park in downtown D.C. It's a wonderful place. And if you walk out the back door of our apartment buildings, you walk onto a trail in Glover Archibald Park, and she took the police officer there and showed him that there was a circle of stones where someone had had a campfire. And this was the evidence that we were a satanic cult, that we had campfires. It was not us. I mean, I don't know where that came from, but that was enough evidence for them to open an investigation.
In March 2019, 5 months after I spoke with Terrell, I released my documentary, Who Will Find What the Finders Hide, sharing the details of the finders' story, including my interview with Terrell. The documentary attracted significant attention and introduced a new generation of true crime sleuths to the story of the finders. In October 2019, only 6 months after the release of my documentary, the FBI began releasing hundreds of pages of previously unreleased documents relating to the finders. Between October 2019 and May 2022, the FBI released 4 sets of documents. Most of the documents contain references to elements of the story which have been widely known to the public. However, some of the pages add further corroboration to the claims that the finders had some type of involvement with the US intelligence community, particularly the CIA. For example, on page 66 of the first FBI document dump, we find a page from the Washington Metro Police Department's investigation into the finders titled Summary. It states, quote, "It is this writer's belief that the Finders organization is and has been utilized by the CIA as a disinformation service, spreading non-essential, non-critical information to various organizations throughout the United States and overseas." Regarding the allegations of abuse of children, the redacted author writes, quote, "I do not think that child abuse was a planned tactic of this group, but as in any cross-section of society, sick and demented subjects belong to a cult as well. I do believe the shaping of the children is a planned experiment of this group, as in the case of the Nazis, they strove for a perfect society. Thereby, in their own way, they tried to form a group of children and ultimately adults that did not suffer from the ills of normal society." The unknown law enforcement officer who wrote the report also stated that it was his belief that the Finders did not disband, but, quote, "as reported in their master plan, have only appeared to disband to prevent further detection from law enforcement and social service officials." The officer concludes his summary by calling for the Finders to be monitored. I interviewed Robert Terrell again in October 2021, nearly 3 years after our first discussion and 2.5 years after my documentary was released. He was unhappy with the conclusions of my documentary and made it clear to me that he did not think I was a credible journalist.
I thought I had good rapport with you. I liked you. You seem like a very nice guy. But somehow or other, you got the wrong idea of what the Finders were about. The Finders were a utopian community that recognized the kind of turmoil that the earth is now in and wanted to do something about it. So we experimented with different ways of living together and raising children so that they would be able to cope with the kind of nonsense that the world has now fallen into. So you could call it a failed experiment, but you can't call it a conspiracy to do the kind of things that the conspiracy theorists online accuse the Finders of being. We were not that. We were a utopian community that was founded on higher principles than making more money and living a life of comfort. There's a difference between a truth seeker and a comfort seeker. We were truth seekers. So I hope that when you ask me questions, like you said you had a couple of questions, that's great, glad to answer them. I hope that you will take the answers within the context of what I have just said.
Sure.
Because I'm telling you the truth. And I hope that you will re-examine the nonsense that is online about the Finders. It's absurd stuff that is put online because of some kind of a problem that the people who put it online have with themselves. It has nothing to do with who we were. So go ahead and ask me your questions, and I hope that they will not just be questions that you can grab a hold of and use to reinforce the conclusions that you have already reached.
Sure.
We had a heated discussion about what the documents say and what Mr. Terrell says.
The questions that you are asking me are not questions that are aimed at understanding the Finders and determining whether you have a
I'm trying to understand why what you told me last time conflicts what I have now with government documents. The second question is, there's clear in 2 different police reports, we have 2 different officers saying that the CIA intervened in the investigation, as well as the Foreign Counterintelligence Agency. That is not my words. It's not conspiracy theorists online. It is in government documents, clearly written. We have this all now once the FBI started releasing the files. So I'm asking you, as somebody who says that's hogwash, to respond.
Give me the wording. I didn't catch that.
The officer, who's redacted and unnamed, says specifically that the investigation had been taken over by the CIA and had become an internal CIA matter, and they also mentioned the Foreign Counterintelligence Agency.
What is your agenda to be questioning this? I mean,
I'm just looking at the police documents and trying to make heads or tails of what really happened. Obviously, talking to people like yourself, talking to people like the customs agent, Ramon Martinez, who filed the report, talking to people involved in these things.
He was fired for incompetence.
In his view, he would say his career was destroyed because he tried to bring things to the table that nobody wanted to hear. That's his perspective.
What did he see? He said he saw that we were ordering children.
He says he saw pictures of naked children. He said instructions from buying children from China, detailed financial records, a number of different things. And
buying children from China.
This is what he says he saw. And he also says that when he went back to go view the evidence, he was not allowed to see the evidence again that had been collected.
As of 2024, no former member of the Finders or their children have come forward to admit involvement with child abuse or connections to intelligence agencies. The Utah investigation into ritualized child sexual abuse. On May 31, 2022, the Utah County Sheriff's Office released a statement detailing how multiple county and federal agencies are investigating reports of ritualistic child sex abuse from as far back as 1990. The sheriff's statement noted that the investigation into ritualistic child sexual abuse and child sex trafficking in Utah County began in April 2021. The investigation subsequently discovered previous reports alleging, quote, similar forms of ritualistic sexual abuse and trafficking that occurred in Utah County, Juab County, and Sanpete County between 1990 and 2010. The sheriff's office stated that portions of these allegations had been confirmed and were being investigated by the Utah County Sheriff's Office in cooperation with other local and federal agencies. The statement called on the victims or individuals with knowledge of the events to contact the Utah County Sheriff's Office Special Victims Unit. Following the announcement, I reached out to Sergeant Spencer Cannon, the Public Information Officer with the Utah County Sheriff's Office, asking him to clarify what was meant by ritualistic sexual abuse. Sergeant Cannon said that this type of case, quote, typically involves a religious component or people from a religious group. Cannon stated, quote, it can also be systematic abuse that happens over an extended period. In a strange twist of events, David Levitt, the Utah County attorney at the time, held his own press conference calling for the resignation of Utah County Sheriff Mike Smith, the man leading the investigation into ritualized child abuse. Although the Utah County Sheriff's Office statement never mentioned Levitt as a suspect, he claimed he and his wife were potential suspects and claimed the sheriff's investigation was politically motivated. David Levitt is the younger brother of former 3-time Utah Governor Michael Okerlund Levitt. The father of the two men is Dixie Levitt, the founder of the Levitt Group, one of the largest independent insurance brokers in the nation. The entire Levitt family is connected to the Church of Latter-day Saints of Jesus Christ, aka the Mormon Church. During his press conference, Levitt stated,
I learned that my wife and I were part of those allegations, alleging that we were guilty of cannibalizing young children and murdering young children.
Levitt claimed the new investigation is related to charges filed against a former therapist more than 10 years ago. He noted that the man was charged in connection to allegations of raping someone he knew from the church. Levitt also claimed the charges were dismissed in 2014 because, quote, the evidence was so outlandish and so unbelievable. Levitt provided the local media with a 151-page document labeled as Victim Statement that described the alleged crimes. The document included Levitt's name, as well as more than a dozen people accused of practicing ritual sexual abuse of children, cannibalism, and murder. Levitt described the report as 151 pages of utter baloney and called the woman who made the allegations, quote, tragically mentally ill, he called for Sergeant Spencer Cannon and Sheriff Mike Smith to resign. Levitt also called for an independent investigation into the case to see where the case documents originated from. Levitt accused the sheriff's office of attempting to interfere with the primary elections, which were only weeks away at the time. Salt Lake City Fox affiliate Fox 13 News also reported that, quote, multiple confidential sources confirmed the new investigation related to a therapist who was previously charged with a series of sex crimes against young female family members. The Utah County Attorney's Office previously dropped charges without prejudice, and the man was not convicted. However, Fox 13 claimed to have records which, quote, indicate the man previously confessed to sexually assaulting at least one of the girls on an undercover phone recording. David Lee Hamblin. The disgraced therapist is a man named David Lee Hamblin. In 2012, Hamblin was accused of rape and arrested. The Utah Daily Herald reported at the time that Hamblin was being charged with 12 counts of rape of a child, 3 counts of sodomy of a child, 1 count of attempted sodomy of a child, and 2 counts of aggravated sexual abuse of a child. The charges were based on events that reportedly happened between 1991 and 1998. However, despite the accusations against Hamblin, all the charges would be dismissed in 2014 after prosecutors said they had trouble obtaining the necessary documents to prosecute Hamblin. Both Hamblin and Levitt are indeed mentioned in the 151-page document Levitt shared with the Utah press. While these accounts have not been proven in court, they do provide some insight into what Hamblin and Levitt have been accused of. One document labeled Victim Statement Number 3 is one of 8 different victim statements included in a larger file from the Provo Police Department's investigation into David Hamblin. On page 49 of the document, we see the mention of David Levitt as being involved in a prostitute house with children. Quote, he, David Hamblin, David Levitt, and Joe Benyon would all jokingly call Rosie Madam to talk about her running a prostitute house, the document states. The Rosie mentioned refers to David Hamblin's then-wife, Roselle Hamblin. A chart describing experience number 50 lists David and Rosie Hamblin and David Levitt as people involved in abuse between 1993 and 1995 at a house in Provo. Under a section titled Other Occurrences, Times and Locations, it states, quote, this happened at nearly every party or when people came over to our homes. However, the frequency refers to how many times this happened with David Levitt. This also happened when we were at parties of other group members, like when we were at Gordon Bowen's house for a few different parties. Redacted often pushed us onto many people trying to get us to have sex with them. She did this at many parties and places she took us. The alleged victim goes on to describe David Hamblin and David Levitt remarking about how they were the, quote, cutest thing. The statement says, quote, David L. grabbed me around the waist and said that he would love to do that and kissed me on the forehead. Rosie walked away, and on the way out, David L. said to David H. that he was going to stop by in the next couple days. The statement goes on for another 150 pages describing 118 cases of ritualized sexual abuse. The arrests begin. In September 2022, Utah County Sheriff's Office Special Victims Unit arrested David Lee Hamblin for multiple first-degree felony sexual offenses against a child. Hamblin, now a 68-year-old man, was booked for 3 counts of sodomy of a child, 1 count of rape of a child, 2 counts of aggravated sexual abuse of a child, and 1 misdemeanor count of lewdness involving a child. According to the probable cause statement, quote, a female victim came forward in April 2022 to report that she had been repeatedly sexually assaulted by David Hamblin. The sexual assaults began when she was 6 or 7 years old in the mid-1980s. The victim's family resided in the same neighborhood as David, located in Provo, Utah. The victim stated she would regularly play with David's children and had been babysat on numerous occasions by David. The victim asserted that the first sexual assault that she would recall occurred when she was playing at the Hamblin residence. The victim recounted a time when she had been sexually abused when she was in the basement of the Hamblin home. The victim described a sexual assault where she and 2 other children were forced to stand in front of David while he directed them to take turns, quote, sucking on his penis. David forced each child to take turns giving him oral sex while he critiqued and criticized their abilities. The statement describes additional incidents of abuse, including one involving another female adult. It also notes that David Hamblin had his therapist license revoked by the state of Utah due to allegations of sexually abusing his clients. However, the investigation has found that he continues to perform so-called therapy in the form of healing circles. Although Hamblin was originally ordered to be held without bail, in March 2023, he was granted a $100,000 bail and allowed out on house arrest with an ankle monitor while he awaits trial. In August 2023, Hamblin's ex-wife, Roselle Stevenson, was also arrested by the Utah County Sheriff's Office for her alleged role in the ritualized child abuse. Stevenson was arrested on one count of sodomy on a child relating to abuse of a girl under age 13. The alleged incident occurred in Spring City, Utah, around the year 1994. Stevenson was ordered to be held without bail. As of June 2024, David Hamblin is still under house arrest and awaiting trial to face the charges of child abuse. The role of religion. As with the accusations against David Hamblin, many incidents of child abuse involve various officials associated with religious institutions. Examples of child abuse can be found in nearly all religions. Probably the most infamous examples involve the Catholic Church. In the late 1980s and early 2000s, numerous allegations of various types of sexual abuse of children by church authorities led to investigations, trials, convictions, and apologies from church leadership. The abuse mostly affected boys, but also girls, between the ages of 11 to 14 years old, with some victims as young as 3 years old. The allegations were made against priests, nuns, cardinals, and other Catholic Church officials. The allegations often involve decades of sexual abuse committed by adults. Incidents of sexual abuse have been documented in Canada, the United States, Chile, Australia, Ireland, and parts of Europe. The crimes of the Catholic Church leadership also include covering up sex abuse allegations and moving abusive priests to other parishes where the abuse often continued. By the early 1990s, reports of abuse within the Catholic Church were becoming harder to ignore. In 1992, Irish singer and activist Sinead O'Connor tore up a photo of Pope John Paul II during a performance on Saturday Night Live. The act of protest sought to draw attention to the abuse allegations and the lack of action taken by the Church in response. Although O'Connor faced heavy criticism for her actions, 9 years later, the Pope publicly acknowledged child sexual abuse in the Catholic Church. He was criticized by representatives of the victims of the sexual abuse for his slow response to the Catholic sex abuse crisis. The allegations against the Catholic Church received even more widespread attention after a 2002 investigation by the Boston Globe. The Globe Spotlight team revealed the Church's secret protection of pedophile priests and a series of articles which had international repercussions. Of course, the Catholic Church is not the only religious organization to face allegations of child abuse. Similar allegations have faced the Jehovah's Witnesses, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, aka the Mormon Church, and the Second Baptist Church. In 2017, Paul Pressler, a former Texas representative and state judge and an important figure in the Second Baptist Church, was accused of molesting a 14-year-old boy beginning in 1979, while Pressler was a justice on Texas's 14th Court of Appeals. The alleged abuse continued until 2004. The following year, Pressler was also accused of molesting 2 men and soliciting them for sex over a period of 14 years. The men were a former member of a church youth group and a lawyer who worked for Pressler's law firm. In February 2019, the Houston Chronicle released a 6-part investigation titled Abuse of Faith, exposing the depth and depravity of the allegations of sexual abuse involving not only Pressler, but other members of the Second Baptist Church leadership. The investigation found that more than 250 people who worked or volunteered in the Southern Baptist churches had been charged with sex crimes. Since 1998, around 380 Southern Baptist church leaders and volunteers have faced allegations of sexual misconduct. About 220 offenders have been convicted or took plea deals, and dozens of cases are still pending. These abusers left behind more than 700 victims, many of whom were shunned by their churches. Some were urged to forgive their abusers or pressured to get abortions after becoming pregnant. Paul Pressler died on June 7, 2024, never facing jail time or punishment for his abuse. In Chapter 16, we will further explore the role of religion in the pyramid of power. Solutions. As we proceed higher up the pyramid, the solutions for the problems presented become more complex. How can we put an end to the widespread abuse of children in churches, schools, families, sports, and groups like the Boy Scouts? How can we hope to create a better world if we don't protect the children and ensure they have a future free from abuse? The answers to these questions are not always easy, especially in the face of organizations and media outlets who seem intent on normalizing child abuse by attempting to rebrand pedophiles as minor-attracted persons, making the argument that child abuse is simply another sexual identity that anyone can choose. We must continue to question and challenge authority, especially as it relates to the most vulnerable and susceptible population, the children. Since abuse often comes from family members or family friends, parents need to be cautious with who they leave their children with. Parents ought not assume their children are automatically safe when in the presence of authority figures like religious leaders, sports coaches, teachers, security, and police officers. This doesn't mean parents should live in a constant state of fear and paranoia, but blind trust in adults simply because of their role in your local community is also not advisable. Sexual abuse of children can also often begin on the internet. Children and young adults are not always aware of the threats of child abusers when they are scrolling social media and posting pictures to their friends. Parents can inform their children of the risks of talking with random strangers in chat rooms, video games, live streams, and social media sites. Parents can also consider parental controls on their children's devices, or consider not allowing the children on social media until they reach a certain age where they may be mature enough to understand the risks. While we cannot protect the children at all times and all places, we as parents, families, and community members can absolutely do our best to educate the children about the dark realities of our world. Finding a balance between terrifying the children with tales of stranger danger and allowing them to roam freely is not easy, but it's absolutely worth the effort. We must continue to question and challenge authority while protecting the most vulnerable among us. The children of the future are counting on us to protect them so they might have the opportunity to grow into healthy, balanced, and educated adults. To dive deeper into this topic, we recommend reading The Franklin Scandal by Nick Bryant and One Nation Under Blackmail by Whitney Webb. We also recommend watching the documentaries Who Will Find What the Finders Hide and Bringing Down Jeffrey Epstein. Thank you for watching.